the efficacy of these devices that are commercially available for cognitive enhancement purposes?
Well, I've been very vocal, at least I'm perceived as as a vocal opponent to consumer neurotechnology, but I'm actually not. I'm actually someone who thinks that it's very important to have consumer, so private company, private sector investment in neurotechnology. And I think that it's very important to have consumer applications of neurotechnology. And I believe that for a very simple reason, because given the global burden of neurological disorders and mental illness worldwide, we really need to expand the quality and quantity of measurements about the human brain in order to create, large-scale data repositories and train algorithms to analyze those big volumes of data and make sense of them. As Tom Insel once said, you cannot cure what you cannot measure. So we need to, measure brain activity in order to cure brain or mental illness. So I think that developments in consumer neurotech can help us get there, because they can help us get more ubiquitous data, as we have seen with, wearable devices and smartphones and so on. So I'm very positive about this. What I'm negative is the misuse of these technologies. So I really want to make sure that as this consumer neurotechnologies advance, we have created the right ethical and legal conditions for this sector of technology development to flourish without causing risks or even harms to people. And I think this is a very important distinction.
What do you personally do for cognitive enhancements?
Well, as I said before, to my knowledge, I'm very skeptical today about using tDCS or something similar to increase my cognitive performance. Things like sleeping well, having regular sleep patterns, physical exercise. These are all things that have shown scientific evidence of being, much more useful towards cognitive enhancement than actual direct neuromodulation. That being said, I would be, very first in line to use tDCS or tACS or whatever else in 10 years from now, if there is, a clear scientific evidence of their efficacy and safety. And there are some studies, in experimental settings, not in the real world, that show some promising potential. So I'm open to it.
Yeah, seems to me that almost for any intervention, except for sleep, exercise, and some dietary interventions, mainly just skipping the sugar and not eating way too much or way too little. But except for that, almost all cognitive enhancement interventions need a lot more evidence. Yeah. That is something that we're trying to do here at Nootralize, actually, trying to enable people to, in an online application, take psychometric tests after using nootropic compounds, so cognitive enhancement compounds.
But just to give you an example, I mentioned that there are certain technologies that are showing some promising potential in the experimental settings. Your readers might be interested in checking out a study that appeared in Nature Neuroscience, I think it was last year. It was around last spring, which basically used EEG measurements in combination with tACS, transcranial alternate current stimulation, in healthy adults age 60 to 76, so older people, seniors. And after 25 minutes of stimulation, this resulted in rapid improvement in working memory. And this improvement outlasted the 50-minute post-stimulation period. So I think this is, what probably most people would qualify as cognitive enhancement. It's really like an enhancement in working memory performance in healthy subjects.
Right.
There is a lot of debate about whether enhancement should incorporate or not therapy, and restoring normal or baseline function in impaired people, or if it's just about over the normal, over the baseline improvement. And I think this is something that would also fit in the narrow definition of enhancement. But the problem, the real challenge that we have ahead of us is how do we transfer this first promising experiments into utilizable consumer applications? Because there are huge translational barriers in neuroscience and consumer neurotechnology in particular. So it's going to really take a lot of time and a lot of hard work to transfer this promising experimental results into real world applications. And there are a lot of bottlenecks that need to be, and a lot of translational barriers that need to be overcome.
Yeah. Do you have any idea of how, or rather, I should ask, first of all, could you give a couple of examples of those barriers?
Well, one typical barrier is things work in the lab, they don't work anymore when they are tested in the real world. And there are a lot of problems for this, usually because the design, the study design in the lab was not adequately sketched. There were some methodological limitations, or the devices were not adequately tested with their end user groups, or the sample size of the study was too small. That also happens very, very often. And sometimes, there is also a more general problem, namely that there is, it's much cooler to develop a new product and obtain funding for developing a new product than for implementing existing prototypes. Implementation is not perceived by investors as cool as design and development. So, there is always a lot of money that flows into design and development, but then a lot of startups face a lot of financial limitation when it comes to implementing what they've done. And that's a totally dysfunctional system. This is also where you could intervene and try to remove these translational barriers.
Thank you, Marcello, for coming on the Nootralize podcast.
Thank you. It was a pleasant conversation.